Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of Red All Over. I'm Tom Webster and I'm joined today by Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much for the invite. It's always good to talk to fans of as many clubs as possible. Although I never quite understand why anybody's interested in what I do for a research job, a lot of people do take interest because the clubs are so important to you guys.
Well, I certainly take interest in what you do. I'm a big fan of the price of football. I listen every Monday and Thursday. It's a great pod with you and Kevin Day, and yeah, it's fantastic. For those that don't know who Kieran is, he's a he's an expert in football finance, and he's going to help me pick apart Barnsley's accounts that was filed last week. So the first thing really is we made another loss. Um, is that good, bad, or just indifferent?
It's never good making a loss in the sense that you've got to do something to cover those losses. Now, that can either be through player sales, it could mean borrowing, although the chances are a bank's not going to lend to a club unless that they're at the upper end of the Premier League, because if you do get relegated from the Championship to League One, it does take a big hit on the finances. And also, I used to do sort of investigations works for the administrators, and I once took a look at a particular club. Won't name the club; wouldn't be appropriate to do so. And the finances were a mess. And I went to see the bank manager, and when I told him just how bad they are, he was practically in tears because he says, if we put the club into administration, which it probably deserves because the management were useless, I'm going to lose a third of my customers because they all support this local team. And also, I've got my two kids who are at school locally. They'll have the crap kicked out of them at school because their dad is the person that's put the club into administration, and either the kids go or the kids' mum and dad go, and they won't be very happy. So he says, in future, once we get this sorted, we're pulling out. The bank's made a decision. We're not going to lend to clubs unless there is a guarantee from somebody that we'll get our money back. So that means that you tend to be indebted to the owners. And if you've got good owners, that's fine. But even good owners can not be in a position at some point. Their personal circumstances change. The owner might pass away. We've seen that at Millwall, for example. Their owner was putting in £10 million a year, and he sadly passed away last year. We know what happened to Matthew Harding at Chelsea and so on. Or their circumstances change, or their kids, say, Dad, you got people calling you all the names under the sun at the matches, and this is our inheritance that you're throwing out the window, and it's making you miserable as well. So if you are losing money, that is a consideration. So it's not ideal, but of the 92 clubs in English football, probably 80 of them are losing money before you get to the player sales position.
Yeah. So yeah, we made a loss of about 4 million, and was that offset by about 2 million of player sales? So it should have been about 6, I think, all in all.
Yeah, I mean
Um,
the player sale profits were just over 3 million, so it would have been over 7 million in losses if you exclude player sales. But Barnsley have done well, and if you take a look at the club, so I've got a spreadsheet here with loads of numbers on, and I'll quite happily send it across to you if you want later. What really sticks out to me is that Barnsley are good at identifying talent and turning that into a fair amount of money. So if we take a look, I've got the last 7 seasons that the club's made £37 million from player sale profits. That's probably twice as much as they made from ticket sales. So that shows you just how important it is for a team like the Reds to be able to bring lads through and then give them a pathway to moving on.
Fantastic. I didn't quite realise that it was quite so much. I know this summer we sold quite a few players and should make quite a lot of money off the back of the sale of Liam Kitchen and Mads Anderson, just to name a couple. But obviously those aren't included in this set of accounts.
Yeah.
So turnover took a massive, massive hit. Obviously, that's probably down to relegation. The fact that we went from the Championship down into League One, and that the money from the EFL isn't as high in terms of TV revenue.
You're absolutely right, Tom. There's a big fuss made between the difference between the Premier League and the Championship in terms of TV money, and there's no doubt about, it is huge. But if you take a look at the difference between the Championship and League One, for every pound that you make in the Championship from TV money, you get around about 15 pence in League One. So, in the case of Barnsley, it went down from over £9 million to less than £3 million, and that includes a little bit of parachute payments. So this season that figure is going to drop a wee bit further as well. And in the Championship, you've got the impact of the TV money. It's by far your biggest revenue earner. It was around about 60% of the total money coming in, whereas last season in League One it went from being the biggest to the smallest. So you can understand why the club wants to return to the Championship, and of course you as fans want to return to the Championship as well, in terms of who the other sides that you're playing and so on.
Yeah, obviously the bigger crowds, the better atmosphere, but also more match day revenue, which actually I noticed increased ever so slightly from the previous year, which I was a little bit surprised at.
Yeah, it's a funny one, that, because what you find is that you've got your hardcore Barnsley fans who will buy their season tickets year in, year out,
Yeah,
and they'll say League One, Championship, don't really care. And then you've got your walk-up fans, and as far as the walk-up fans are concerned, if it's Tuesday night and you're at home to Reading and it's cold outside and there's the Champions League on telly, it's going to cost them 15, 18 quid. They have to go and get out of the house. They'll just say, well, in the Championship, I'm not going to do it because we're at the wrong end of the table. I'm not confident that we're going to win. Whereas if you're in League One, and last season, you got into the playoffs, and it was an exciting season. Then those matches, especially sort of in the last third of the season, the walk-up fans, and I'm not being critical of them at all, because we know just how difficult personal circumstances and economic circumstances are. You make that little bit more effort. If it's going to be, I'll get grief from the wife, or I'll promise to take the kids to the cinema, but it's a big match and we get this, and we'll be fourth if we win this. It's more of an attraction, and people do make that decision. So it is a big issue. And against that, of course, in the Championship, you've got some pretty big teams with big away followings. Well, that also now applies in League One. You've only got to look at those sides around you. Derby, Portsmouth, Bolton. They're all got all big teams.
Yeah, the Derby filled our away end, I think, 5,000 last Saturday. So yeah, definitely. Speaking of sort of the pressures of finances, last season we took on a sponsor that was less than good, basically. Do you think that is due to the pressure of trying to make money and just being sort of blinded by the money?
Yeah, if you're working in the commercial department of a football club, making moral and ethical decisions when you're under pressure, because if the money doesn't come in, somebody's not going to get paid, and you're conscious of that, and you've been given a target, and all of a sudden, somebody from the world of crypto comes along and says, we'll not only give you what you were hoping to get for the front of shirt deal, we'll give you twice as much. under those circumstances, you're going to go, well, this is an absolutely fantastic deal. And that's what we're seeing from
Mm.
certain industries. So, I'm aware of the company to whom you're referring. And ironically, I was watching BT Sport yesterday, and they were sponsoring, I think it was Dorking,
Yeah.
because BT had the match from the National League on. They tend to have big pockets. Now, the downside is that they might have offered to sponsor Barnsley that money. Whether you'd have got it or not is another matter, because you take a look at what's happened in Milan, you take a look what happened with Chelsea, and their sleeve sponsor last season, again, all from the same industry. These organisations are not noted for financial long lives. So yeah, they're looking for a quick bit of profile. The record in terms of paying the club is actually a bit hit and miss.
Mm. So, um, in terms of debt, I looked through and I think that's liability, isn't it? Is what I'm.
That's right. Yeah.
So in terms of that, it's actually come down. So I'm a bit confused as how we can lose money, but as debt goes down, is that due to cash injections through
Yeah.
the
I mean,
owners?
what we've seen is the reason why cash has gone up is the owners last season put in £6 million into Barnsley Football Club Limited.
Mm.
Now that allowed the club to pay down some debt. So yeah, all of a sudden you got money sitting in the bank account. Um, Part of the reason for that is to allow the club to absorb those losses, but there was still there was enough left over, so the club repaid, 800 grand last year, and the season before that they repaid a sort of net 500,000. So that the owners have gone down that route. And for people not familiar, the difference between debt and shares is that if the owners put money into the club in the form of shares, they can never demand it back. So at
Mm.
least it gives you that degree of protection. Whereas we're seeing at some other clubs, owners or potential new owners. So we've got Everton, for example, where somebody who wants to buy the club has lent it 180 million quid. But if that deal doesn't go through and it gets sold to somebody else, the first thing that's going to happen, they'll be knocking at the door and say,
We want
well,
our money back.
we want our money back and we want it quick.
Yeah. So in terms of the 6 million that was put in in shares, um, what I did notice is that it was a change in percentage of the ownership as well. So Nirav, uh, the Crine family, and I think Julian increased their shares, and Chenley and Paul Conway's shares decreased. So I'm assuming that they didn't take up on the opportunity to buy shares.
That's right. Or they took up less of an opportunity. So you're increasing, you're increasing the way that you cut the cake of the club when you
Mm.
expand the number of shares. You can do it that everybody buys the same proportion, in which case that there is no change. But it could be that's part of a strategic change within the club. It could be that you've got some of the shareholders who physically don't have enough cash
Mm.
to support the club to the same extent. And one of the owners has said, look, as part of this, I'll put money into Barnsley Football Club, but instead of owning 30%, I now want to have 40% or whatever it's going to be.
Right. So that makes sense. Oh, just another one I'd like to touch on. Recently, the Crime family sold their share of Oakwell. They owned 50% and the council owned 50%. Now the council own 100% of it. And as part of the deal, we pay rent, but it's almost like a non-profit making scheme where all the money that's paid in rent is supposed to go to the upkeep of Oakwell and future development. So I'm assuming the West Stand, and there's talk of safe standing. I would just is that a good deal or not in your opinion? Because I'm a bit half and half. Does that mean that the council can sell the naming rights to to the ground and have some um, and Barnsley Football Club have no say in it or what. It's just a bit strange.
Well, if you talk to a commercial lawyer, they'll give you one answer and one answer only, and that answer is it depends. And that's where we are, and that's sort of the reason why we're both chuckling. But that's an in joke on the price
On
of
your
football.
pod.
Every time I talk to a lawyer, they say, Kieran, well, it depends. You need to see a small
Yeah.
print. I think the pluses outweigh the minuses here, because if it is now council owned and there is a desire to redevelop, then it's a lot easier to get it past council itself in terms of the final decision. Whereas if Barnsley Football Club and if Oakwell was still a private asset, you're going to have the potential for greater objections. Is it in the council's interest to try to sell naming rights? Every Barnsley football fan is a voter, so you can make sure that the council knows your opinion one way or the other as to the wisdom of trying to change the name of something which is very close to your hearts. And I think whilst there are many opportunities to criticize and deride politicians centrally and locally, and I'm not party political in any way, shape, or form myself. They're also quite pragmatical. They're quite pragmatic and practical. They can read the tea leaves as to the acceptability of a proposal. So my gut reaction is that you do now have a degree of protection. Barnsley councillors are there to represent you and to represent your best interests. So therefore, we would hope that they would take the view that they're going to do what's best for the community of the town itself. So all of that, I think, is a positive. The downside is if you've got a private owner and they've got 10 million quid that they want to use to develop the ground, they can just say, right, let's do it. Whereas you now enter the realm of politics. If it's going to cost the local council 10 million, you're going to have people say, well, hold on, you just closed down a local library. What about the potholes in the road? The lights aren't on, down our end of the street, and you're putting money into the local football club. It can look bad. So you've got to take a look at a much broader picture. But my gut reaction is the positives outweigh the negatives.
Yeah, my feeling is that they obviously want us to stay at the ground because there was talk a few years ago that we could possibly leave, and that it's done so that any future owner hasn't got the opportunity to try and sell it for housing, like is it Torquay's owner? I think we're trying to do that, and I think
That's right.
Scunthorpe's definitely.
Oh, don't get me started on Scunthorpe yet.
Yeah. So I think that was the whole idea of the council taking over Oakwell. But yeah, I just wondered if it hinders with the development of it. But yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that again, you can be practical here. It could be that the council will say to a private partner, if you want to fund the expansion of Oakwell, we're willing to give you 30% of the stadium back as part of the deal. So, never say never in the world of infrastructure, real estate assets, and politics and football. They are a mix. They do keep me awake at night for some clubs, but I've never had any issues. There's a club not too far away from Barnsley with an owner who's done a variety of things with the stadium. And that has been, I think, very challenging for the fans and I think everybody in the city.
I think Sheffield club. Are you thinking of?
Oh, you're reading my mind. You're reading my mind, Nick.
Yeah, I'm glad he doesn't own us. That is he is an interesting fella. Well, thank you very much, Kieran, for joining me and helping me out to pick at the bones of our accounts. I sort of get the feeling that there could be better, but they're not horrendous, and the vast majority of football clubs seem to lose money.
Yeah.
But we have the owners that seem to be willing to put at least some money into to back that up, and their plan seems to be to try and to sell players to help fund the club. So
Yeah,
I think,
I think if I was grading them, I'd probably give them a solid 7, perhaps a 7.5 out of 10.
all
So
right,
yeah,
that's fair.
if you're doing your Strictly Come Dancing, yeah, it's up there.
That's a 7. Well, yeah. So thank you very much, Kieran, for joining me, and it's been an absolute pleasure. And I will be tuning into the pod in the week. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers now.
Cheers now.